much for that kind introduction and that very warm welcome. My congratulations go to the Korea Economic Daily, to Crivet and to the Ministry of Education for hosting what I'm sure is going to be a very important and thought-provoking event. For me, it's just a delight to be back here in Seoul. I've been a frequent visitor and I always enjoy experiencing this city's resilience and its dynamism, and I think that's on display in this room. My most memorable trip here was in 2011 when I came as Australian Prime Minister with Australian war veterans to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Battle of Kapyong, one of the pivotal battles of the Korean War. Some of the veterans travelling with me had been fascinated by Korea and had journeyed here many times since the war. Others were making their very first visit since marching out of the battlefield. For them to come and see Seoul, one of the great cities of the world, in a nation that was once home to so much blood-soaked ground, was life-affirming. Just as Australia was with you then, we are with you now, as the Republic of Korea continues to stare down the bellicose threats and nuclear ambitions of the North. None of us are naive about the complexity of this security challenge. For this opaque and oppressive regime, prepared to starve and terrorise its own people and murder its opponents, international rules and commonly understood standards of conduct mean nothing. Yet we know from the past that pressure can be brought to bear and united global action does matter. In this continuing struggle, you have our full support. Every day, the citizens of the Republic of Korea prove, by calmly going about their business, that they will not be intimidated. They show defiance and courage by continuing to build their nation and its future. And it is about the future and how we best prepare for it that I want to talk today. Of course, predicting the future is always fraught. As the American baseball great Yogi Berra once said, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. The risk of being wrong is acute. Even if you get it right, on the day you make your prediction, you can still be subject to ridicule. This came powerfully home to me when I recently attended an event in the electorate I proudly represented in Australia's Parliament for 15 years. I was there to honour my predecessor, Barry Jones, a futurologist who had become known to the Australian people and much loved by them because he was the most successful player of all time on a national televised quiz show. Barry famously predicted that by the year 2000 there would be more computers in the Australian state of Tasmania than there would be cars. Right around the nation, people laughed and rolled their eyes, thinking that they'd never heard anything more ridiculous. Of course, Barry was proved right, and there are far more smartphones, tablets and computers now than cars. But his was a brave prediction, given it was made in the days that computers were clunky things. At the time of Barry's prediction, the US government had the world's fastest supercomputer, which was used for complex calculations, like those necessary to simulate nuclear explosions. Its cabinets were so bulky that, if they had been placed on a tennis court, you would hardly have had enough room left over to swing a racket. The computer's cost was $55 million US. Even Barry didn't predict this giant would be taken out of service in 2006, because by then the Sony PlayStation 3 had equalled its ability to process data. Predicting the future is even harder today than it was when Barry was doing it in the 1990s, because the rate of change in 2017 is demonstrably faster. Thomas Friedman of the New York Times provides a pithy comparison to illustrate the increasing speed at which change is happening. He says 1,000 years ago, inventions like the longbow took a century before they changed the shape of daily life. 100 years ago, new technologies like aeroplanes and automobiles took 20 years to impact daily life. Now, new technologies, such as smartphones, take approximately 5 to 7 years to change our work and lives. That means the things innovators are working on today can rapidly reshape our world tomorrow. We know innovators are focused on solving the challenge of machine mobility, of teaching machines what we all learned to do as infants, to walk on uneven ground and around hazards, to form in our minds a map of where we are and the environment we're in. Indeed, the very technology that means your smartphone has embedded in it a high-quality camera is now enabling machines to negotiate rapidly changing environments. For example, a Google driverless car has the ability to generate over 1 million data points a second using laser beams and detectors, telling it all it needs to know about traffic and road conditions. Innovators are also focused on creating machines that can converse. Siri, the talking application in Apple phones, is improving itself over time, using all of the sound files generated by people who use the application, and it is developing an apparent sense of humour, quipping, "That's sweet, but it's not meant to be," to any user who swears undying love. I'm not sure if Siri has seen the movie Her. So, what will the future look like? Following an analysis generated by MIT, that great institution of learning in Boston, imagine a grid that divides work into manual and non-manual, and then into repetitive and non-repetitive. Already robots doing manual repetitive work are familiar to us. It happens on factory lines all around the world. Increasingly non-manual but routine work can be done by machines too. Think of accountants doing tax returns, stock market analysts writing company earnings reports, and importantly for this forum, human resources managers reading resumes. This kind of work is now increasingly able to be done by machines rather than people. While robots are getting better at mobility and speech, non-routine work with manual elements like hairdressing or caring work like looking after the elderly seems safe from near-term replacement. Non-routine, non-manual work is the most safe of all. Even if the mobility and speech challenges of machines are resolved, machines will never be the innovators, the ideas creators. People need to do that. But not everyone's world will fit conveniently into one box on the MIT grid. Everyone's world at work and beyond will mesh with new technology, and it will be all around us. Everybody's labour and life will be leveraged up by machines. A good window into that is through another game, this time not the kind of quiz Barry Jones mastered, but the game of chess, which was once viewed as one of life's highest intellectual challenges. People would almost worship at the feet of grand masters. Bobby Fischer, a 13-year-old protege, shot to fame when he beat a Grand Master in 1956. Yet as long ago as 1997, a computer beat the then reigning world chess champion. Today, no one, no matter how able, can beat even a mid-range computer chess program. You can run one on your mobile phone that is capable of beating a Grand Master. But what happens if instead of playing against each other, the machines and the humans play with each other? This happens in what is called freestyle chess contests, in which a person can be assisted by a computer. Intriguingly, the key insight out of this kind of chess isn't that the best human player combined with the best computer always wins. Rather, the determinant of the team most likely to win is the quality of the process used by the human interacting with the computer. And that means that even a less skilled player with a less powerful computer can emerge the victor over a better skilled player with a better computer if that less skilled player works smarter with the machine. This is not an insight confined to the world of games. In the world of work, workers will increasingly be called upon to coexist with and complement machines that perform routine tasks by leveraging their interpersonal and complex problem-solving competencies. The OECD estimates that the bulk of workers will will see 50 to 70% of their tasks lost to automation. Nurses, for example, might be stripped of routine tasks such as taking vital signs. Instead, they will be expected to engage with the patient, convey subtleties of the patient's expression to physicians, and solve problems when machine error occurs. Innovators are also rapidly improving 3D printing, which is already demonstrating the capacity to completely change the way we create and purchase products. In just 10 years, the price of the cheapest 3D printer has come down from 18,000 Australian dollars to just 400. It wasn't that long ago we were all paying that amount for a pretty basic black and white model printer. In some airports, spare plane parts are already being 3D printed in remote locations. Smartphones will soon have 3D scanning possibilities, meaning you will be able to 3D scan your feet and print your perfect shoe at home. China has already 3D printed an office building. And access to smartphones, the tools that help deliver so much of this change, is getting better every day. Already the cheapest smartphones are $10 in Africa and Asia. By 2020, 70% of all people, over 5 billion people, will own one. Think about how much information people will have available to them and what this access to technology can unlock in terms of opportunity. So many of these innovations are exciting. They offer us cheaper, faster, and more effective ways of doing things. But the impact on people's lives is powerful and in no way confined to the distant future. In a series of reports on the skills in the workforce, the World Economic Forum stressed the magnitude of changing skills demands, noting that, and I quote, on average, by as soon as 2020, more than a third of the desired core skill sets of most occupations will be comprised of skills that are not yet considered crucial to the job today. Taking the longer time horizon of 20 years, estimates are that 70 to 80% of jobs could disappear. What's the key to coping with so much change? I believe that key is something that this nation already does so well. At the outset of this speech, I reflected on how much the Republic of Korea had achieved since the Korean War. That story of success is really a story about education. Modern Korea has been built through the education of your people. Time after time, international tests show your schools are amongst the best in the world. Day after day, Korean parents urge their children to study as if their hearts are on fire. And education is the key to unlocking prosperity and equity in our rapidly changing world. Yet there is a paradox here that requires our attention. Here in Korea and right around the world, in an era of accelerating change, the institutions that seem the least changed are schools. Over 10 years ago, Time magazine ran a story on education in which it argued that if a fairy tale character like Rip Van Winkle was asleep for a century and then woke up, he would be hard-pressed to recognise anything in the world around him except a school. While he would be dazzled by the whizzing automobiles and planes and confounded by hospitals, entering a school would give him a sense of familiarity. A building that children in the community go to at set times of the day during specific days of the week, with classrooms and teachers at the front lecturing to seated students who were taking notes. The article argues this would look very much the same as a school 100 years ago. Time magazine could revisit this piece today, and while it would find more smart tablets and phones in schools, in many ways this argument would still run true. Indeed, global research papers on education show that in every country studied, the average school today shares similar characteristics to those of the past. Structurally, children go to school buildings during predetermined days of the week and year, and although the total number of hours children spend in school varies widely by country, in individual countries the hours have largely stayed the same. In school, teachers lead children who are grouped together by age through a prescribed curriculum developed by adults with little input from the students themselves. A range of subjects is taught in discrete time periods throughout the day. Indeed, in many places, subject times have remained more or less stable since 1920. Students rely heavily on teacher instruction, with a particular focus on academic subjects, and work actively to understand and retain the material presented, frequently incentivised to do so via examinations that the teacher administers. Students progress through school based on their performance with predetermined time periods. Recent research observing teaching in US maths classrooms concludes that many of the teaching techniques, particularly with teacher-led instruction, are the same as those described by academics studying teaching in the early 1900s. Given the demands of our rapidly changing world, can we really afford for schooling to be so quaint? My answer is an emphatic no. We must strive for change, but in doing so, we need to acknowledge that mass compulsory schooling has been one of the most successful human inventions of all time. It was Prussia in 1763 that first decided to educate all of its children, and the idea certainly caught on. Indeed, over the last 200 years, the number of children enrolled in primary schooling globally soared from 2.3 million at the beginning of the 19th century to over 700 million today, almost 100 times that of population growth. But school education today is beset by two great challenges. One is best described as skills uncertainty, getting schooling fit for purpose in a world of change. The other is skills inequality, the challenge that globally far too many children are locked out of education entirely or taught with such low quality that they fail to even master the most basic skills. Addressing skills uncertainty will require us to move from a content-driven approach to education in which we structure learning as if the main task was to transfer facts from the brain of the teacher into the brains of the children, to an approach that blends mastery of core skills like literacy and numeracy with higher dimensions of learning. In particular, children will need the skills that are uniquely human and complement digital technologies, such as communication, teamwork, critical thinking, and flexibility. The academic Yong Zhao argues that for education to truly help students flourish in an increasingly fluid and fast-changing world of work, it should foster their entrepreneurial spirit from curiosity to creativity to resilience. He argues that the structure of mass schooling rarely does this, pointing out that the better countries do on the highly respected international test called the Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, the higher countries do on that test, the worse they tend to score on entrepreneurial capacity as measured by the annual global survey on entrepreneurship, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. Building on his work, analysts at A.T. Kearney found that the top PISA scoring countries had an average perceived entrepreneurial capability score of 0.06, almost 2 times below that of mid and low scoring countries on PISA, which had an average score of 0.13. The gains for getting this right are obvious and they're enormous. But let me give you just one statistic to paint the picture. A 70-country study by McKinsey Global Institute estimates that by 2020, approximately 83 million high and middle skilled jobs will go unfilled because employers looking to hire in developed and developing countries will not find the people they need with the necessary academic and non-academic skills. That's a chilling reflection on what is currently wrong with our approach to education. But it's not only employers who are looking for young people to come out of schooling with a diverse skill set, from academic abilities to a flexible mindset to inter and intra-personal competencies. Civic leaders and policymakers regularly argue that young people must be better prepared to navigate an increasingly complex, interconnected and fast-changing world. Their education experiences must prepare them to solve society's problems, which increasingly cut across borders and range in topic from climate change to migration to violent extremism. In Teaching and Learning for the 21st Century, Fernando Reimers and Connie Chung of the Harvard Graduate School of Education argued, based on case studies evaluating education planning in 6 countries, that despite global ambitions, education systems are not creating sufficient opportunities for youth to learn these needed skills. Of course, it will remain important for all young people to develop deep mastery of academic skills from math to science to languages to history. But this is by no means the full suite of capabilities that young people must develop to be successful in their adult lives. Children will need to be prepared to continue to learn, adapt, create and innovate throughout their lives. While this broad set of competencies has always been useful for young people, navigating uncertainty, complexity and rapid change are, more than any other time in history, the central responsibilities that will occupy our children's future lives. To return to the theme of this conference, the future in your hands, I would suggest to you that realising the promise of those words, especially for children, will require tremendous reform drive in education. At the same time, we aim to solve the challenge of skills uncertainty. If we truly value every child, we must solve the challenge of skills inequality. William Gibson, the lauded science fiction novelist, is credited with the saying, "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed yet." Like far too many other profound and attributed quotes, no one seems to be able to pin down whether Gibson actually said it. But whatever the source, these are important words to keep in mind because they ring so true in education. The pressing problem of skills inequality has been well documented, most recently by the International Commission on Financing Global Education Opportunity, the Education Commission, on which I had the pleasure of serving with Jim Kim, the leader of the World Bank, and Joo-Ho Lee, one of your distinguished former education ministers and the leader of the KDI School of Public Policy and Management. Through careful analysis of education data globally, the Education Commission has projected that by 2030, more than half of the world's 1.4 billion children will not be on track to achieve basic secondary education skills, including literacy, numeracy, problem solving and critical thinking. Even in high-income countries, nearly 1 in 3 children will be left behind. To give just one example of this kind of inequality, in the United States, 2/3 of the richest children reach levels of high proficiency on the PISA secondary maths examination, compared to only about 1/4 of the poorest. This inequality starts early. In the US, scholars find that, and I quote, "Upon entering kindergarten, children from low-income families have weaker academic and attention skills on average and a higher probability of demonstrating antisocial behaviour than children from high-income families. None of these gaps shrinks over the course of elementary school." But by far, it is low-income countries where children are poorly served, with 9 out of every 10 children projected to reach adulthood without the skills they need to thrive. Indeed, around our world, there are 260 million children of primary and lower secondary age who are out of school and out of hope. They will never see the inside of a classroom. If all of these children inhabited one country, it would be 5 times larger than the Republic of Korea and the 5th largest nation on earth. Then there are hundreds of millions more who attend school but only for a few years and simply do not have enough time in education to acquire the skills they need. Added to all these access problems is the quality problem, the fact that too many schools are of such low quality the children attending them do not learn. A diversity of reasons leads to this phenomenon of students' low learning levels. According to the Education Commission in 2015, there were 2.7 million fewer teachers employed than were needed across the developing world. If this continues, over 25 million new teachers will need to be recruited by 2030 just to ensure every child can attend primary school. In many countries, including some of the poorest in the world, teachers are so overburdened that they are teaching classes of 100 or more students at a time, with 10 students for every book and children squeezed onto benches. Classrooms are filled with students of widely varying levels of ability, and of course, that provides a challenge for teachers. Especially in the developing world, teachers are burdened with non-teaching duties, including administration and event planning, and are often not in the classroom teaching. In many African countries, for example, students receive just under 3 hours of instruction a day. The language of instruction and pedagogical approaches used in the classroom also limits students' learning. Almost 40% of children in the world are not taught in their native language, despite evidence showing that mother tongue instruction is more effective for learning. Additionally, many students have learning or physical disabilities that are not accommodated, and schools lack accessible materials and teachers trained to teach special needs students. So, as a global community, we are faced with an inequality that is both startlingly large and threateningly persistent. At current rates of change, it won't be until 2111 that the world sees the first generation of sub-Saharan African girls to universally complete primary and lower secondary education. To put all of this on a human scale, consider this. My great-niece Isla just turned 2 years old. If she has children at the average age at which Australian women become mothers, and in turn they have children at the same age, then Isla's great-grandchild will be born when the world finally achieves universal basic education for sub-Saharan African girls. My great-niece's great-grandchild. Now that's far too long to wait, especially as we know from our own societies that while education matters for economic growth, it matters for so much more. We know, for example, that education is a significant determinant of the peace and stability of societies. High levels of schooling, provided opportunities to learn are equitably shared, can significantly cut the risk of conflict. Youth without education are at greater risk of recruitment by rebel groups, and we know that a major motivating factor for Syrian families seeking refuge in Europe and elsewhere is access to education for their children. So, if we want to reduce armed conflict and stem irregular migration flows, equitable access to quality education is essential. It is now also crystal clear that education improves health outcomes. Better educated populations make healthier choices for themselves and their families. Should an epidemic strike, higher education levels make it easier for communities to understand what is happening and abide by health warnings. We know education is a preventative factor in the spread of HIV, especially for girls. Every additional year of secondary school significantly reduces a girl's risk of contracting the virus. An educated mother is also much more likely to marry later and have children later, to have fewer children, to vaccinate her children, and to have them sleep under mosquito nets to prevent malaria. And of course, there are huge gender equality benefits of women entering the workforce and utilising their talents and potential for the whole population. Indeed, education is the bedrock of women's economic empowerment. Given all of this, much more must be done, and we must not fail the world's children, particularly the poorest girls. In my post-political life, I chaired the board of directors of the Global Partnership for Education, the only multilateral body in the world today dedicated to improving access to education, learning and equity. Our work is in the poorest countries on earth. We work in over 60 of them, and our model for change is an effective one. I am pleased that Korea is one of our more than 20 donor partners. At our financing conference in February, which will be co-hosted by the Presidents of France and Senegal, we are asking all donors to step up and pledge so that our resources are doubled. It is my fervent hope that the Republic of Korea, which so values education, will play its part. Let me conclude by saying, as a former political leader, I know how difficult it is to drive profound change. I experienced the challenges of persuading the community to accept a reform agenda, getting accurate information distributed and understood, overcoming political opposition, and so many more roadblocks and obstacles as I work to improve Australia's education system. And I understand that in many ways the difficulties for political leaders in pursuing reform are multiplying, because the way people get their information today is not assisting us in having these big debates. This is well put by my friend Barry Jones, the futurologist, who predicted so much accurately, but who admits to one major error. He said, and I quote, "A fundamental mistake was made by many writers, myself included, about the impact of the IT revolution. We assumed that access to new technology would open people up to the world, that people would seek out the universal and long-term. Instead, technologies such as the iPhone have reinforced the realm of the personal, as exhibited in social media, with its emphasis on the immediate, the next few minutes, concentrating on family and close friends, reinforcing existing views." The same problem is described in the following way by Bill Keller, who edited the New York Times, and I quote, "The hyperactive news world we live in cuts a couple of ways. You have to scream louder to be heard above the crowd. The idea that you would slow a story down, report against your assumptions, dig a little deeper from that source who might have a different take on things, that runs against the metabolism of the internet age." Added to this is straight-out manipulation to attract attention, the phenomenon of fake news. Given so much today seems to conspire against nurturing an environment that is capable of sustaining mature democratic debate on long-term challenges, it is especially important to see a forum like this one with its sponsoring parties who are prepared to focus on making a difference, who are prepared to facilitate reasoned debate and exchange, who are prepared to help all of us think carefully and deeply about the future. It's in that spirit that I wish you the best for today's deliberations as you strive to shape a better future. And I thank you for your very kind attention. Thank you very much.